Next in row is Andrzej, and I have really fascinating fact about himself. So he's a big chess player, and he actually will have master candidate degree in chess, which you get if you beat really cool dudes in the world, I guess. So and usually like he go into towns and he finds the spots where people play for chess, but for money. You know, like. Haven't anyone played for like chess for money in his life? Like here, there are a couple of goals. Yeah, you see, like, yeah. So I have no idea you can do it. So and usually they threat him as a tourist, so they like kind of put a lot of money on it, and he wins them. So it's really a good way to earn money if you're traveling somewhere, right?
You need to show me this place in Minsk where they play for money.
I will show you. I know the place. So let's meet Andrzej. Woo! Yeah.
All right, thank you for the introduction, and thank you to the organizers for putting up this great conference. Thank you to Dimitri and to Daria for helping me with getting here to this conference. A few words about myself. I'm one of the people behind Arkansas. We have a Ruby blog. I'm one of the people behind Rails Event Store. Anyone using it? It's not very popular, so I'm not expecting too many people. I'm one of the organizers of Wrocław RB. Anyone been there? Okay, did you like it? Okay, thank you. I'm also running Rails Architect Masterclass. We have like 100 participants right now. As was said, I'm a chess player, and I'm on my journey from a candidate master to an international master. So chess is taking me actually more time than programming nowadays, which is weird. So don't go into chess if you're easily addicted with such things. So yesterday I tweeted that I'm coming to Belarus, Minsk, and my plan was to get a selfie with Aaron, and here we are. So thank you, Aaron. Okay, so that's the first achievement for this conference. Let's talk about business logic in Ruby, and today we learned from Tank that there is Ruby support for Lambda, and I think in the Ruby community we kind of we don't know how big deal it is that Ruby support is for AWS Lambda, and how serverless changes everything we know so far, and how the way we are working with Ruby code bases will be different in a few years from now. So that was a great talk, thank you. So serverless H is coming, and even if it's coming slowly, because usually it takes some time to adopt it, it will impact the way we are writing code. And one of the ways it impacts us is via the event-driven architecture. If you look into serverless, it's a lot about events coming and handling events. But the conclusion after serverless, and it's not only about serverless, so even if this prediction is wrong, we are getting into this times where we will spend more time implementing business logic and integration code than writing infrastructure code. So we have things like deployment changes with serverless or containers, but we also have many third-party libraries nowadays, and writing many things by hand is now no longer really needed. We don't need to write our own authentication, our own image uploading, our own email sending. It makes more sense to actually rely on third-party APIs and third-party tools. So what we are left with is business code, is business logic. And obviously some integration code. And the fun thing is that Ruby is great for writing business logic because we are so close to the English language. Let me tell you my story, how I started with the business logic. First quiz question, do you know what this is? Smalltalk. What exactly is this? Squeak. It's a Squeak ID. So this is what Smalltalk is like, and by total accident my first business logic written in any kind of language was in Smalltalk. Because in my first year at the university, object-oriented programming was taught by a professor who was really crazy about Smalltalk, so we were all forced to write code in Smalltalk back then. Which also tells you that I'm really old, because that's not many people remember Smalltalk times. So after Smalltalk, I went into another fantastic language. Anyone recognizes? Java. Do we love Java now in the Ruby community? Yeah. it used to be different. Like it used to be like we hated Java, and DHH came and he was like, we hate Java. But he was actually, what DHH did in 2004 was amazing, because he was a really fantastic salesperson and a really good marketer. So he was okay, let's get back in time. 2004, there is no Rails yet. There is Ruby, but only in Japan it is used, right? So DHH comes and he creates Ruby on Rails, and there are no Rails programmers by definition yet. And so what does he do? He attracts Java programmers and PHP programmers mostly by using different arguments, but he's really very good at like targeting the audience with good arguments. So I was part of the Java community. I was part of this Java community which was all about Agile. And Agile back then didn't mean meetings. It went really caring about business logic and caring about good code. So DHH targeted us, a fraction of the Java community, by saying we can get really nicer code. By the way, achievement unlocked. No one killed me for showing Java code. Plain old Java object was a big thing in this part of the Java community where I was in. And this is what this code was about. There is no inheriting from active record base. This is really big thing. So in the Java community, we actually cared about having plain old Java objects. So no inheriting from any libraries, no using any frameworks. It became a thing when we joined the Rails community, like, I mean, we as a Java people, and we got seduced by this kind of code. And I think we felt a little bit dirty by writing this code, but on the other hand, like, who can't love this code, right? 2 lines and everything is just working. So that was amazing, and for the productivity, it was like a huge boost. So all the Java people who were in part of this fraction in the Java community, like we switched and we didn't really look back at the Java again. Obviously, what was shown to us was a bit of cheating, because when you inherit from active record base, you actually get lots and lots of methods bringing with you. Some of them are like visible for you, some of them like almost dynamically generated, and there is a huge coupling to the database. We all know it, so I will not repeat that, and we all agree to that. We agreed as the community at the beginning that it was a good sacrifice because we are so productive. But over the years, this became the kind of coupling that active record provides became a problem. So obviously there are some nicer DSL for writing Rails. So we have associations, we have validations, and it makes us super productive, again, by hiding some details behind the Rails framework, and also by introducing more coupling, because if we do stuff like validate title and so on, under the hood we are generating the error messages. So now our business class is now coupled to the way we are displaying the error messages to the views, right? So we introduce more and more coupling by using this stuff. And this is my first kind of technique that I want to share with you, because over the time I was like looking how can I make my life with Rails and Active Record easier without really sacrificing everything and getting rid of Rails. I still love Rails. Actually, every year I say something different, so I sometimes love Rails, sometimes I hate Rails. But overall I'm okay with Rails, and this is the technique that I learned over time. So I was researching many different architectural paradigms, I was researching certain stuff, and one of the things I was researching was a thing called CQRS, which is a really bad name to remember, but the whole thing about CQRS is that you can split your object, Active Record object, into 2 objects. One is for reading, one is for writing. This is the simple thing here. And when you split your object into two objects, the readers disappear from the logic actually, so your business logic class doesn't need to expose data. This was one shock for me that it's possible, because I never liked the idea that I'm exposing all the attributes from Active Record. So readers disappear and only logic is left, and you need to somehow communicate from the part where the logic is making, when the logic is made, you need to somehow communicate with the other parts. So we are introducing the idea of events. So you're publishing the event so it's visible on the other side. And then you introduce a read object, okay, read model, which only contains getters. So because you have this split for 2 parts, the read model doesn't care about validations. It trusts that the events are correct. Let me show you. So this is the starting object. This is the starting implementation. This is the business logic, no longer inheriting from Active Record base. We can implement very easy stuff like whether title is empty or not. By the way, empty title is not really a business logic. It's more like a form view logic. But I just wanted to show you a point with a simple example. And then we are publishing an event. So the publishing the event is actually, so the post is kind of like, has to know a way how to publish the events. And when post is drafted, we can have the actual read model. And active record, this is where active record is great. Active record is great for displaying data on the web views or using JSON or HTML. So the associations are mostly used for displaying data. It's very rare that associations are used for business logic. For example, blog post with comments is mostly for displaying. But there are some examples of associations, like for example, order has many order lines. This is actually some business logic there. How do we connect those two things? We say subscribe. I just coming up with the API. We just want to say that pub-sub communication should work. So when post was drafted, we want to say that the read model, the view object, should populate itself with the data. So now we have two objects and they each have their own data. This is important fact here about the way we are splitting the reads and writes. And this is probably the most practical thing that you can learn from this talk. So let's now focus on a trivial, less trivial example, because post with title and content is obviously boring. This was something that my colleague from RKNC, Pavel, has found. This is, who is using Jira? Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't want to make fun of you, but really. So we found, I'm not using Jira. We found it on the internet. It's actually from the Jira website. So this is how Jira issue lifecycle looks like. So there are certain states and state transitions, and this is apparently this is how Jira works. This is actually taken from their website, so it's not a requirement made up. And it's probably less trivial than post title and contents I want to show you. So what we did, after many discussions internally at RKNC, Pavel, my colleague, said, okay, enough talking, enough discussing, let's show some code how we can implement such things using the different techniques that we have, like the one I have previously shown you, or some others. So Pavel started this repository. At the beginning, it was only a private repository for RKNC. Then we made it available for the Rails Architect Masterclass participants, and now 3 weeks ago, it was made public. So RKNC aggregates, you can, we call it aggregates because we come from this domain-driven design way of thinking where business logic is about aggregates. But it doesn't really matter, there's really not much about DDD here. So you can go to GitHub, clone this, and look at the certain ideas. Each folder, each directory there shows a different kind of flavor of implementing business logic. So if you want to get inspired how you can implement business logic in your application, that's the way. You can, actually there's more examples now than the screenshot was made. So the first implementation that we kind of started with is the implementation that we are mostly using at RKNC projects. We work with clients, we usually take over existing Rails legacy code bases, and then we like domain-driven design them, CQRS size them, and even sourcing size them, right? So we are just turning those old Rails applications into something better and easier to manage. And the pattern of aggregate root is kind of the dominant pattern that we are using. I will show you why I'm not super happy with that, but I will show you how it looks. So first of all, I'm not happy with that because it includes aggregate root, and as I said at the beginning, I would prefer to have no dependency on any library or framework, even if it's our own framework. So aggregate root is part of the Rails event store. And the flow is easy. This is just part of the class. So we have the class called issue. We have methods for all the state transitions, and we check some logic whether it's possible to make a state transition or not. And then we publish an event. Apply is publishing an event. Apply is part of the aggregate root module. So this is the first part of this class. Second part is the actual logic. So here we are implementing what it means to be, you know, can close or can resolve and so on. And the third part is the event sourcing part. So it's actually optional, but I wanted to share with you that once you introduce the idea of events, you can build your object from events. And you do it by applying the events to the object one by one. And the on method is actually run every time a new event is like to be replayed. So you can see we have one instance variable. Actually, we have two. There was ID, and this is the second one called status. So we just persist what is the current status of the state machine. So it's one class with the aggregate root pattern. It knows its ID. Not a big deal, but something worth like being aware of. It knows how to make decisions. It knows how to publish events, and it knows how to event source from events, and it keeps the state. The status attribute is like keeping the state. And the part I didn't like about it is that we are mixing the events with business logic. And I was trying to find ways of how we can make it better and decouple it so that we are left with only business logic. So, but by the way, that was the pattern that we are using at RKNC. What I'm going to show you is mostly like research and some experiments. I think this code will work mostly, but it's not something that was tried on big production projects. So I came up with this idea of polymorphic aggregates or polymorphic classes. You know what this polymorph is about? It's about having different objects, different classes with the same API. Runtime, you have no idea which object you get. You just know the API that you can call. In Java, they would say that they share the same interface. In Ruby, we can't really say that, so we just have to trust that there will be the same interface. So this is the implementation, more or less. Just 3 states are shown. There are 5 states, but the idea is that we have a class per each state. And each class implements all the possible state transitions, but for some of them it just say raise an exception because it's not possible. And the nice thing here is that when you have a possible transition, it returns the new object. It returns the object of the next state to be there. So this is probably more, some functional programming people say that this is very functional-like because you return a new object instead of modifying the issue of the current issue object. The code that is used for calling this class, it's now changed. So now this is like let's say a service object, and so when we call issue.open and no exception was raised, we can publish an event, which means we have moved publishing the events out of this class to the class that it calls it. We call it command handler, so this is the command handler. And the idea is here that because it's a command handler, you can see that there is command.id. So also we are able to not only remove events, but also we are able to remove the ID as something that the object has to keep. In Ruby, objects have their own ID already. We don't have to like replicate the database ID. So that was a nice consequence as well. And when everything is fine, the event is published, and the event sourcing part is now also outside of the object. It's not part of the object anymore. So what is the summary here? We have one class per state, and it knows how to make decisions. Doesn't know its ID. There is command handler which knows how to publish the events and how to event source from events. So we decoupled. We put more responsibilities in the command handler, and now we keep the state as part of the type. Again, probably functional people would enjoy it. So that's nice. However, there is one problem. And the problem is that we seem to reinvent the Ruby message protocol, because what we are doing with this code, is that we are saying, no, this method is not possible to call. And Ruby already has a mechanism for that, right? We can call it duck typing. So duck typing is an idea that instead of having the implementations for each method, we just say some methods don't exist at all. Because Ruby under the hood is actually the message protocol, so we are sending messages to objects, and the way we think about methods is a bit artificial. It's just a syntactic sugar over messages. So it's always at the end we are calling the ruby.send method. So this is actually the full implementation of the whole state machine using duck typing. So it's no longer a polymorphism as at the beginning, because now we actually don't have those methods on Ruby. I would say it's like polymorphism meeting duck typing overall. So now we got rid of all the boilerplate about raising the exceptions when certain state transitions are not possible. I really liked this code at the beginning, and I really enjoyed it as a way of like relying on duck typing. What does it change in the way we are calling this object? Now we need to check whether this object responds to that method. So that's our way of getting the state transitions possible or not. So if the issue responds to open, we can say issue.open. Another way would be obviously to raise, just leave it for Ruby to just call the method and rescue from no method error. That would be another way. So I wasn't sure which one would be better. But the response to seem to be like less controversial overall. The problem with this implementation is that issue is now many objects. It's not one object. Okay, but with OP, we are all often taught that it's okay to have many objects because that's better design and so on. But this is not exactly what is the business mental model behind it. If you talk to business people and you explain them how our code works, and you tell them, oh, so by changing this, by starting the issue, we now have the concept of a new issue with a different state. And the business people, they're like, I don't understand. Like, there's one issue, I can see it. It's one issue, I just changed the state, so it's not a new object inside. I didn't create a new issue. And implementing business logic, I think, and I believe in that, has a lot to do with mapping our code to the way business thinks. Try to find the common language and express it in the code as radically similar as possible. So how we can solve this problem? How we can not have many objects but still have something similar? That was me in the forest, where I was trying to rehearse this talk, and at the beginning of this talk didn't really have the solution for this problem, and I made myself a picture when I just realized how I can solve this problem. So that was meant to be the end of the talk, like just last week. But then I realized that Ruby obviously is a rich language, and it has many good possibilities, and there is a technique we can use here for implementing the same code without introducing new objects. And we can do it by roles, I will get back to it, but exactly we can use the extend method on Ruby. Anyone actually is using extend on Ruby objects sometimes? Okay, what are you using it for? What? Decorators, okay, yeah, that's a nice thing. So there is a whole architectural paradigm called data context interaction, DCI. At the end I will recommend a book about it, where they are solving exactly this problem. They are saying that the current paradigm that we are using here, the mainstream programming language, and by the way, Ruby is now mainstream, we are actually doing what they say. I know it's a bit offensive to us, but what we are actually using is class-oriented programming and not object-oriented programming. We are creating classes, not objects. And that's the problem with our design, that's the problem with our business logic, because business thinks in objects, we think in classes. So really, there is a mismatch here. So DCI is actually a big thing, and I will not have enough time to talk about everything here about DCI. It's a really deep stuff, and by the way, DCI was invented by the same guy who invented MVC. So there is something good about it, but one thing, DCI as a concept doesn't really work with many of the existing programming languages. Ruby happens to be one of those languages which are partially supporting DCI, mainly because we have extend. But there's one problem with extend. Anyone knows what's the problem with extend? Probably there's more problems. One of the problems with extend is that you cannot unextend, which has some consequences, unfortunately. So after getting back from the forest, the first thing I did was obviously writing to my RKNC colleagues, hey, I found a solution to the problem we were discussing. We will just use the DCI. We've been discussing DCI like 5 years ago, so everyone remembers the discussions. And I was like happy. That was Tuesday this week. And then on Wednesday or on Thursday, I decided, okay, time to prepare for the talk and show actually the code example. So I wrote this code expecting, because now in this repository, which I showed you, the unit tests are shared. They're the same for each of the implementation. So I just changed the code from the polymorphic example, and I wrote this. So now the open, for example, the open implementation is just extend open, so self.extend open, and I expected this to work. And when the tests fail, I was like, no, I just made some typo, I don't know. But only some of the tests failed for the more complex scenarios. So I was like, what do I miss here? And by the way, I've had to take the polymorphic example as my base code for making the roles, the extend usage, because if I use the duck typing implementation with the one with not all the methods implemented, do you know what's the issue? If we use duck typing and we try to extend, the methods will not be fully replaced. The way Ruby works when you call .extend is that it adds the module to a list of the things that it will check during dispatching the method. And if you have one state which only has two methods, or sorry, let's say it has 3 methods possible, and then you extend with a new state which is only 2 methods, the third one will still exist, right? Remember, we don't have unextend. So that's a problem. So I've had to solve this problem by actually using the polymorphic example. So we are back to the situation where we have all the implementations with raising exceptions and reinventing Ruby message protocol. Okay, anyone knows why it doesn't work? This is actually quite a deep stuff about Ruby and extend. Even Aaron doesn't know, so we're good. The problem is, if we are like changing the states, and we are like starting, we are opening, and then we are calling .start, we are in progress. Then we are calling stop, we are back in open. Back in open means we will try to extend .open again. It was once extended at the beginning, now it's for the second time. You can't extend the same module twice. So if our state machine we will be in the same state again and again, Ruby silently ignores it. And the silent part is really worrying me because that's how I didn't know what exactly was happening. So when I found out about this problem, my first reaction was, okay, let me share to my RKNC team how disappointed I am and it doesn't work. So I wrote on the Slack, this doesn't work because Ruby doesn't allow me to extend the same module twice. But obviously in every team there is this one person or 2 people who are all about, you just need to create a function and make it a monad, and then there is a functor, and then it will work. So there is Rafał in our team, and Rafał told me something about creating a function for wrapping the module so that we'll return a new instance of the module. But I was like, yeah, you functional people, I will not gonna show this on the slides, right? So, but then I came back to this code, but Rafał did inspire me that there's a problem with this implementation and that the functional thinking, maybe it's a way of solving that, but I solved it differently with a small hack, and I'm not happy with that, but we can actually call .clone method on modules. And by calling .clone, we're actually creating a new instance of the module. Remember, in Ruby, everything is an object. Modules are objects too. We can call .clone on them. And now for Ruby, this is a different object every time. So now I can actually extend and extend and extend, and everything is fine. What is the other consequence of this code? And this is related to Piotr's talk about performance. Allocation. Yeah. The problem is that, so it's one thing about garbage collecting and allocation. Second thing is that in Ruby you have the list of methods you have the list of like modules. Actually you can call on each object, you can call .extended modules, I think, and you can see a list. So Ruby uses that for dispatching methods to know where is the method to implement. So the more you are like transitioning around the state machine, the more the biggest the list is, and for millions of calls that probably can be an issue. So that's a performance issue. Remember, I'm not advising to use this code, I'm just showing to you as my journey to implement business logic and using some Ruby capabilities. Also, I'm not a big fan of using specific language tricks to implement business logic, because if ever it comes to switching to a different language, it's not easy to port like meta-programming things or something like that. Okay, so the summary here, what did we learn today? First of all, and this is the most practical thing, if you want to experiment with splitting your active record objects into 2 parts, this is a relatively safe technique once you are getting into the event-driven architectures a little bit, so that's one thing. You can even source your business object. It doesn't make sense to even source your view objects, so that's another thing. Most business logic problems can be reduced to state machines. That was my kind of enlightenment recently, that you can talk to me after the talk, and I will try to reduce every business logic problem to a state machine. That's my challenge. So even very simple things can be reduced to at least a state machine with 2 nodes. This was something that I'm yet to explore. If we are talking about business logic being reduced to state machines can be reduced to language and grammar problems. So everyone who did some formal education around computer science and about formal languages and so on, we now know what kind of new world it opens to us. Having a grammar, and there are like context-free grammars and some other kinds of grammars, like regular expressions are, for example, it's a language. So once you have a language and a grammar, you can generate possible words or sentences in this language, right? So now we are entering the area where you can take your business logic, show it as a grammar, and there are some tools which can verify the correctness of your implementation with against this requirement. There's this concept from Haskell about property testing, right? Where you generate all the amount of tests you can do dynamically, and it checks against your implementation. So I think having grammars and combine this with property testing can give us some ideas that we can get a business logic as an input to a programmer and create a grammar from that, create a state machine, and then we can get further. By the way, state machines are just one kind of the. Now I know I entered the language world. I think there are some other more complicated business logic that I can implement using that, because with state machines there is like a limited subset of business logic I can solve. That's another thing that I hope you can get out of it. There is a concept called data context interaction. It's an architectural paradigm, and we can use it in Ruby, at least partially, with .extend method. This is a book that I recommend. This is like something I recommend to read. So James Coplian is a really smart person and one of the people behind the DCI community. They created this book called Lean Architecture, and it's all about teaching you how to think in real object-oriented programming instead of class-oriented programming. And by the way, there is actually there are 3 languages which support DCI quite nicely. So one of them is Ruby, but only partially. Second one is the one we all love. Everyone does it, but everyone is ashamed. JavaScript. So JavaScript is actually a good language for DCI. And the third one is Scala. Scala has the concept of mixins, and mixins are a really nice way of implementing roles. I would also like to encourage you to contribute to your implementation. So the requirement is very simple state machine. So in the RKC aggregates, you can see the existing implementations, but it would be nice to see some others. After my previous talk about it, some people contributed their own implementation, so it was nice to. It's not about judging which implementation is best. It's about just having some overview what is possible. And then the repository, the tests are already there. So, and it's also mutation tested. By the way, this is not the talk about mutation testing, but if you are not using Mutant yet, you may want to try it. It's a fantastic tool for actual test coverage for your Ruby code. And using this repository can help you understand how mutation testing works, because it's using it under the hood. So just to wrap up, I will be in St. Petersburg in June at the conference. Anyone goes there as well? Yeah. Okay, so see you there. I'm also running a free webinar in 10 days from now, so if you like my style of explaining why Active Record is not the best, you may want to register, rknc.com/webinar, and that's it. Thank you very much.
All right, so questions? One here.
Well, I may be wrong, but the repository you are referring to on the screenshot has the log sign
really?
On your slide. Yep. And so it looks like private. But
sorry, I will fix it in a minute. But it was public, so
okay.
I'm really surprised.
Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Security conference here. Questions?
Oh, I didn't tell. I'm actually a big promoter of async and remote work. I work remotely for 15 years. I have 3 copies of a book I wrote together with Robert. So if anyone is interested, please come. It's for free.
Yeah, we're giving this for questions, right? So questions. Here we go.
Hey, I'm here. So one question. Looks like you're a really deep researcher about business logic. What do you think about Trailblazer? Sorry.
Trailblazer.
Yeah.
I'm in a hard situation to answer because I drank too many beers with Apatonik.
Yes.
But I'm not using it.
Okay. Okay, makes sense.
Can we turn off the camera and repeat the question?
Sorry?
Can we turn off the camera and repeat the question? I'm sure. I'm joking. Oh, thank you. Any more questions? Right there.
Hello, thank you for your speaking. Can you please say what is the best way for working with databases except Active Record? What you will advise to use?
You mean what do I advise to use in Rails projects?
Yes, if you don't like Active Record.
If you don't like Active Record, oh, welcome to my world. I could talk about for ages, but there are those acronyms which I'm using, but they obviously are deeper than just acronyms. So domain-driven design is really our world where we can, it's not something that's very popular in the Ruby community, but Java community, I know Java, but they are using it and it works for them. .NET community is also very popular with DDD. So DDD is like a really good entry point to discover new ideas and how code can be structured. And when it comes to persistence, because Active Record is quite a lot about persistence, DDD is like good friends with event sourcing. It doesn't really require event sourcing, but it's good friends. So I would advise to start learning event sourcing, because there are really good reasons to learn about it. Obviously, it's not super easy, and there are some traps, so it's better to try event sourcing on a side project first, and only then introduce on real project. So my advice is domain-driven design, event sourcing, and the technique I showed you before, so CQRS. CQRS is actually something that can drastically help you Rails applications, because Rails applications are 80% about reading data, not about that much business logic. So if you can encapsulate your view components with their own storage, and that's what CQRS advises, you can have really nice structure, kind of almost like for free. It's very safe.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for your answer.
Okay. Thank you. Any more questions? 3, 2, 1. We have one more book here, so you have better come up with a question. No? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Andrzej.